right, so today's talk is going to be very light on the slides and heavy on the interactive live coding, and the workshop especially will ask you to actually do something. So the title of the talk here is Ruby Libraries Important for Rails, but there are a couple of lies about this. The one lie is that it's not actually about Ruby libraries per se, it's actually about the Ruby standard library. I like to think of it as a collection of libraries, though. So like, array is it's a library for manipulating or creating and manipulating arrays. The other thing is we're not actually going to cover libraries that are important for Rails. We're going to learn how to learn about libraries important for Rails. There will be a little bit of actual digging into to code in this portion of the talk, but my hope is that by the end of this, if you're not already comfortable reading the Ruby documentation and just plowing through it, that you will be. Because even for someone who's done a lot of Ruby programming, what we're going to do is useful. Like I learned things preparing for this talk as I went through the Ruby documentation. So I want to start off by motivating this. I've been influenced by this idea that it helps to reset your attention if you show pictures of things that you can eat or things that are dangerous and so on. So I'm opting for a possibly recognizable theme of dangerous creatures. We'll start with a wolf here to give us our motivation. And so in order to motivate this, like why might you want to learn more Ruby if you're doing Rails? Probably preaching to the choir, more or less, but this is a portion of the sample application from the Ruby on Rails tutorial, and there we go. So let's just take a look at some of the things that are going on here. A lot of this is very specific to Rails, and again, you certainly should not understand this unless you've already gone through the tutorial and you've basically memorized. I mean, even I look at this and like, wow, what's going on here? And I wrote the damn thing. But if you look here, oh, thank you so much. So I just want to look through, this is the user model for the Ruby on Rails tutorial sample application, which builds basically a little Twitter clone. How many people here have read most or all of the Ruby on Rails tutorial? Okay, so that's a fair number. So this is the user model. And I just want to look through and look for some things that are pure Ruby, that aren't specific to Rails. So there's a line here. This is the line with a valid email regular expression. This is kind of a mini language, the language of regular expressions. But certainly, knowing about regular expressions is useful. And as you might expect, there's a regular expression standard library, or part of the standard library. We've got, these are hashes here. So being able to manipulate hashes, it seems like a useful thing. And just, let's take a look at, actually, you know what, let me see if I can, damn it. Wow, I don't even know how to launch things without the applications. I'm going to launch Keycaster, and I always do command space, but it's not working here. I'm like completely unable to use my own machine. Here it is. Let's see if this works. Hey, look at that. So please let me know if this is more annoying than useful. All right, so here's another example. This is the user spec. The reason I did that, by the way, is just so I could show you things like this. So if I do, this is Command T. This is the Finder in Sublime Text. It's just good to be reminded of the things, things like that. Yeah, that's a good idea. Right here? Yeah, the only thing about that is that they actually do progress up. But, okay, so this is the user spec. And this is an example of an array and iterating through it. Now, I know that you think, the chances are pretty good that you already know how to iterate through an array, but I just want to emphasize that these data structures, these classes and modules show up in Rails code bases, even in a relatively simple sample application. That's one more I want to look at. Let's look at our controller. It's the relationships. Oops, that was. And so here's an example where accessing elements in a nested hash. So it's really useful to know how to use the Ruby standard library. And the more complicated your application gets, the more likely you are to need something from the standard library. And so it's amazing how useful it is just to sit down and read the documentation. So let's take a look at it. This is our next section. We're going to look at RubyDoc. Here our stag is motivating us to look at RubyDoc and specifically in the context of IRB. So let's take a look at RubyDoc. All right, so this is that GitHub repo I mentioned. Those of you who came a little late, try to visit this URL, see if there's enough Wi-Fi, and try to clone this repo. You're not going to use it until the workshop, but it's mild. It could. This is the basic notes for this talk. So here, I just went through the standard library, and using my experience in Rails, I thought, well, which of these things are useful in a Rails app? And this is what I came up with. So these are links to RubyDoc, which has documentation for the standard library. Let's move this over a little bit. So you can see there's actually quite a lot of information about arrays in this case. And it's amazing how much you can learn just by going through and reading this documentation and trying it out. And in particular, what will happen is that if you read through this documentation and you learn about the different aspects of arrays, at some point you'll be writing a Rails app and you'll see a pattern and you'll think, oh, wait a minute, I'm doing that. I actually know how to do this. This is in the standard library. There's a way to accomplish this. And basically, anytime you can use the standard library, you should, because it's been well tested. It's typically very fast compared to writing custom code. So it's good just to sit down on occasion and build up your sort of your knowledge of a bunch of different just pieces of information. It's I think actually memorization is underrated as a tool for learning. If you just have all this stuff in your head, it's not going to make you a great developer by itself, but it will certainly help you. So let's just take a look at this documentation that shows up at rubydoc.org. So there's some introduction to what arrays are, and then there's just a beginning. This is the simplest thing. Array equals 1, 2, 3.0, and then this is just telling you that this is what the result should be. So one really cool way of learning about a part of the standard library, I just can't not do Command Tab, is to open up an IRB session, the interactive Ruby, and just, oops, that's no good, and just paste in something like this and see what happens. This is not exciting, I know, this part. But OK, so that's a start. Ordinarily, I would put this on left. I would have these side by side, but I don't have enough horizontal space. But you probably do. So the standard library documentation typically breaks into two parts for something like array here. So there's a section that's kind of just explanatory that gives a bunch of examples, and we're going to look at a few of these. Using IRB. And so there's some different sections, some iterating. And then there's a section here called public class methods. And this is just a systematic listing of all of the methods that arrays respond to. In other words, it's basically everything you can do with an array. And so what we're going to do, we're not going to do this exhaustively now. I'll show you some tricks for sort of learning about this, but it's amazing how much you can learn just by going through this. This is one of the things I used when I learned Ruby is I just opened up the standard library and just read through, okay, let's learn about arrays, let's learn about hashes, let's learn about strings. And so, for example, you may not have known that you can do array intersection with the ampersand character. This is treating arrays as sets and doing a set intersection with the ampersand character. So we'll talk about that in a moment. And I learned, I didn't even know this. So here's array.new, and then array.new with an argument and with 2 arguments. So let's just see how that works. Man, my kingdom for command tab. I guess they're using ARY. So array.new, this isn't surprising, but I literally did not know until I prepared this talk that if you did this, array.new of 3, that it would just give you an array with 3 elements filled with nil. And if you do this, you give it say a string here, and it'll just make an array initialized with that string. And I don't know offhand if I will ever need this, but it's useful to know, because if I ever do need it, now I know how to do it. Rather than, like my temptation would be to do something like this. Before I might have done this. I would probably just use a literal constructor here, just something like, but then I might do, actually I would probably have done it like this. Something like this. If I wanted to do that foo, probably do this. That's pretty good too. It's basically the same. So in fact, let's just verify this. I've just done this funky thing with the multiplication. Let's take a look at that. I'm just going to keep doing command tab, because like my whole life is doing command tab, and I can't train my brain not to, apparently. So let's see if we can find, this is a good challenge. Can we see if we can find that multiplication? Did I just, yeah, so this is in alphabetical order. Where is it? Yeah, here we are. There's an alphabetical order, which is to say it starts with ampersand here is the first thing in the alphabet, according, it's before a letter. And so here's the multiplication. I didn't even know that. Look at this. This is amazing. I didn't know you could do this. You can actually give it an array of multiple elements. So let's take a look at that. That's funky. I mean, of course I prepped for this, but I didn't want to over-prep, because I wanted to be surprised by things in the standard library that I didn't know. We've already discovered things. This is great. So I didn't know you could do this. You can do 1, 2, 3. And so if you multiply that by 3, it should give me that 3 times in a row. And what is this thing? I'm not even making this up. Times comma as a string, and that can What's that? It's an alias for join. So this, what was that? Is this? I seriously did not know that until this exact moment. How many people knew this when they walked in the door? It would be awesome if you did. You're like, yeah, that's right. I should be teaching this class. That's amazing. I had never seen that before. That's really wild. Okay, so there we go. We've learned something already. So one useful skill to develop when you're doing something like this is to know when to skip something. So do not be afraid to skip something. If you're looking at it, and if you decide you're going to get motivated and learn about arrays or learn about hashes or whatever, and you get to one of these examples, say, and you just have no idea what it's talking about, just skip it. Come back to it later. It's really incredible how you'll come back to something 6 months later and think, wow, that was easy. So let's see if we can find something that's too hard. Obtaining information. Maybe arrays are just easy. Yeah, so there's all kinds of useful things. Look at it. You can insert into an array at the index of a particular location. Wow, look at that. So if you have, well, this is too interesting not to do. So we have a, oops, let's just copy this here. All right, so 1, 2, 3, 4, and so we want to insert at 3, and then what did they do? It was like a fruit or something. Yeah, so check this out. Array.insert, and then the element, and then a string. I don't even think I've ever done this before. All right, so it's not too interesting. So here we can see that you can pop an element off an array. You can use it like a stack, array.pop. So it really depends, I think, on your learning style, whether you want to read through this documentation or whether you just want to go systematically through. I think I probably tend to prefer just to march through the methods. Although it's not always going to be the case that, that the method's going to be listed. So this section is a good example of that. So here's a section on map. So let's, what's the array here? It's just 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Yeah. Uh-huh. So the map method is not actually a method on array. Someone probably knows where it lives. Where does map live? Yeah, so map lives in the enumerable module, which collects a bunch of different things useful for iterating through any sort of object that supports the each method, essentially something that is just a sequence. So this is an example of a situation where this explanatory text is potentially useful because it's actually not going to show up among the methods unless you're working separately on the enumerable module, in which case you would see lots of examples of map. So let's take a look at what map does. This is a reminder. So a map takes a block. If you don't know what a block is, how many people here do know what a block is, more or less, roughly speaking? Yeah, so if you don't know what a block is, it's pretty hard to explain it. So here we're going to make, we're going to take this function and apply it to every element in the array, and it's going to return the square of each element. I don't think that's actually, what's the example they gave? They raised everything to the, so this is a good example. So you can see that this variable is just a dummy, it doesn't matter. And we can raise 2 to each of these powers as well. Incidentally, I'm just going to, this is, suppose you had a square function. So now you can do, we can map the square like this. This is the same thing, it's just going to square each element. But now you'll note that what this is doing is just a single variable. Basically, we're applying square to each element in the sequence. So there's actually a shorthand for this. I think this is going to work. Oh. Why didn't that work? Is it ending brace. Oh, look at that. Huh. Didn't I just do it? Oh, I see what's happening. All right, so does anyone see what's happening here? Yeah, what's happening here?
So what you're actually doing there is calling toProc on a simple SQR, which returns a proc that tries to execute the square SQR method on what's passed in. You're actually trying to do x.sqr.
Right. So what this is trying to do is it's trying to do something like this. And one doesn't have a square method. So this is a little bit outside the scope of the talk, but this is fun. So I'm going to do it. So the way to do this is, well, actually, let's see if we can use the standard library. This is a good example. So let's try to guess. What is a 1? We can actually interrogate the number 1. We can ask it what its class is. Somebody must know what, someone who is a big, yeah, there we go. So someone who's more of a beginner. There are obviously people here who know a lot. Yeah, so 1 is a fixed num, which is essentially a small integer for some value, small that's, I think it's machine dependent actually. Probably like, so let's look at fixed num. This is our fixed num class. And I'm just going to search for square, see if there's any way. Nope, so there's no square function. which isn't surprising. Uh-oh. Boy, this is really painful. So we can actually add square to class fixnum. I mean, this is kind of a stupid thing to do, but so let's. Oh, right. So I'm going to multiply a fixed num by itself. And so inside of the fixed num, I can just use the self keyword to refer to the number, and then end. Oops, that's no good. And so now I can do something like 2.square, and it will square it. And now I can do this this thing I did before. Same syntax error. Yes, victory is mine. So this is really what right now I'm just playing. I'm just like, okay, I've got IRB open. I've got the array class. I'm just going to go through and I'm just doing whatever seems like fun. And this is a great way to learn. So let's go down and take a look at. Oh, actually, no. I want to say no. We can look at it now. This is good. All right. So now we're getting into just a systematic exploration of the different things arrays can do. So here's array ampersand other array gives you a new array, and it is the set intersection, which is really kind of amazing. I actually did know about this one. I'm not a complete idiot. So let's just do this. 1, 2, 1, 3, and intersect that with, say, 1, 4, 3, 1. So, and you just formulate a prediction in your head about what the intersection is of these two sets. I mean, they're not actually sets, because set elements are unique. So these actually aren't sets, they're arrays. And so, for example, this guy here would correspond to the set 1, 2, 3, because 1 is repeated. So the intersection just takes, well, when you formulate your conjecture. So this is these are the elements that are in both arrays. So this is potentially useful. There is a set. Set is part of Ruby, but this shows that you don't need to worry about the apparatus of sets if all you need is an intersection. This is another useful thing. Next one, let's see. All right, we've already looked at this multiplication. We've got a concatenation, which is something certainly useful to know. And one of the nice things about this documentation is it shows you a lot of the synonyms. So let's just add these together. So this is array concatenation. It just puts them together. Incidentally, I hate using plus for this. Anyone want to know why I hate using the same thing works for strings, string concatenation. Why is plus really annoying for people with a mathematical bent? So addition, it looks like addition, and one of really a very important quantity of addition. And really, in more advanced mathematics, of course, if you take abstract algebra, plus is always a commutative operation. Multiplication isn't necessarily. You can have non-commutative, like matrix multiplication is non-commutative. But plus should always be commutative, which is to say that A plus B should always be B plus A. But obviously in this case, if you do like 1, 2 plus 3, 4, right, that's not the same as the other, as the reverse. And I find that irritating. So anyway. What I would do is use a synonym, which we can look at here. You can see it says, see also the hash sign concat. This is a Ruby convention. This means that it is a method on instances of array. So I just clicked on it, and so now you can see that concat is actually the same thing. And this makes me happier as someone with a background in mathematics, we can actually leave off the parentheses if we want, and that does the same thing. So I feel like concat's a little more verbose in this context, but it's much clearer that we're not actually adding two things together. Although I admit I use plus for string addition, so sue me. Okay, so let's go. We're doing it in time. Good. Okay, so this is an exploration using IRB, but this is not, I want to get a little fancier. Let's take a look at this. So I want to talk a little bit about RubyDoc and RSpec. How many people here have used RSpec? At least a little bit? That's good. Got it. So this is our lion, introducing us to RubyDoc and RSpec. That's so weird. Command Tab works on that. Maybe it's because I have Keynote running? I don't know. Okay, so this is where I've got this little project set up. I'm going to get out of this. And let's see, it's actually here. All right, so this is just a tiny project with a gem file. You can take a look at the gem file. It's just, oops, I should actually. Yeah, so all the gem file does is includes the RSpec gem. And then I have a spec directory that's got a spec helper and a sample spec. So the sample spec is what you'll be starting with if you want to take this this option when you are during the during the workshop, which is coming up pretty soon. Okay. All right. So what's one of the things I like about testing is it gives you a very structured way to investigate things. So let's go back to this example here. This is probably simple enough now that you've already memorized it. You probably knew it, several of them already. So let's take a look at this this thing here, this little block of example code. It says that, what does it say? It says that array.new returns an empty array. Array.new with an argument returns an array with a length equal to that argument and filled with nils, and that array.new with two arguments returns an array with filled with that second argument. So one of the cool things, so basically what we're going to be doing here is writing some tests that effectively test the Ruby standard library, and you might even think of it as documenting the Ruby standard library. So I'm going to start off with some blocks. One of the cool things about RSpec is that it reads a lot like English. So if you haven't used it, just have faith in the syntax that I'm showing you, and when it comes to the workshop, if you decide to go this route, go ahead and try copying the syntax and seeing if you can get it to work. So I'm going to describe the array, and in particular, I'm going to start by describing, actually, I'm going to start by describing the new method. And this is something that you might not know. This isn't covered in the Rails tutorial. There's an alias for describe, which is context. It's exactly the same thing, but it just, sometimes it feels more natural to say context. So in this, I want to describe array.new in the context when it's called with no arguments. And so this is also actually a new RSpec syntax as of the latest RSpec. They've gotten rid of the .should, and there's a specific reason for that I'm not going to go into, but the newest way to use RSpec is to use the expect method. And so what we're going to do here is we're going to expect array.new to, and then there's, unfortunately, it doesn't support this double equals, so we have to use the method eq for equals. But it's pretty close to English still. So we expect array.new to equal, and we expect it to equal the empty array. So let's run this. Why is that not working? What did I do wrong? What's going on here? It's really strange. Require spec helper. This is strange. I mean, this was, like, literally this was working. I must be, right, what am I doing? No, so what we want to say what it should do. It should return the empty array. So just, take note that I've been doing this a long time, and I even have the stupid answer on my iPad, and I still mess it up. So if any of you have seen the screencast, I leave in mistakes because I just want to emphasize it. This happens to everyone, okay? Don't feel bad if you're like, man, I'm such an idiot. Like, yeah, you are an idiot, but so is everyone. Like, everyone is an idiot. People are stupid, especially me. All right, so let's do this. And here we go. I'm using a nice little plugin for Sublime Text that runs the examples. Can you see that okay? Or should I, at the bottom there? Can everyone see that? This is because it says one example. Does it say one example, or do I need to move it? Yeah, it's being clipped. Let's move it over a little bit. Yeah, so we've got one example, 0 failures. So this is cool. So we've verified that array.new returns the empty array. And so let's put in a couple of other things, and we're going to get a really nice little payoff here. Put it over here. Let's see. This is fine. Well, so what's the next context? This is the first one is when it's called with no arguments. When it's called with one argument, or in particular with an integer as an argument, so what should it do? I can get rid of this here. So that's no good. That happens sometimes, and I'm not sure why. All right, so it should, it should return an array. Okay, so this is actually good. So there are two things that should happen here, right? When it's called with an integer as an argument, we expect that it will return an array with the right length, with a length equal to the integer. And we also expect that it should be all nils. So it's actually, the second test actually covers the first case too, but it's nice to break them out, and for multiple reasons. But you'll see in a second that it really does document everything about this method. So what I want an array. Well, we can do this. This is good. So it should have length equal to the argument. So, by the way, I've got a tab trigger that I've defined. This is available as part of the Rails tutorial Sublime Text bundle, but eTab does the expect to. And so then I'm going to do array.new, and let's just call it with 3. We expect, actually I could have just done tab there, to equal, actually we want to test the length. Right, we want this to equal 3. So let's run the tests here. Shift-Command-T runs the whole test suite. Shift-Command-R runs just this. It runs the test in the current block. In this case, just the it block. So it should also be all nils. Should return with all nils. Return an array with all nils. There are various ways to test this, but I think this is the simplest. Because this does test the length, but I like making it explicit. So this should equal nil, nil, nil. So save it and run the tests. Oops. And so let's run that was just that test. Let's run the whole test suite. That's cool. And we've got a little duplication here already. In fact, there are a couple of things here that we can probably eliminate. It would be nice to capture this number 3 as the length of the array. So the way to do that in RSpec is with a let block. We can let the length to be 3. So we can do this here. Still green here. And we can also notice we've got some other duplication here. This guy, this array.new of 3, is also a duplicate. So we can reuse length there. And now we expect array.length to equal length. And we expect the array itself to equal nil, nil, nil. Now we've got tests, so it should still pass, but if it doesn't, we know we'll catch it right away. Okay, that's cool. And so now I want to show you something that you may not have seen. I'm just going to first run our spec just to verify that we're green. But there's something cool about RSpec. One of the things you can do is you can call it with a format parameter, -- format documentation. And if you do this, it prints out a possibly useful thing. So you can see this is array new when called with no arguments should return the empty array. Array new when called with an integer as an argument should have length equal to the argument and should return an array with all nils. So this is basically documentation for the array method, for array.new. But it's executable documentation. It's documentation that will go red if something goes wrong. The test suite will fail. And so I think if you do this exercise, it's really hard not to learn a lot about whatever thing it is that you're documenting. And at the end of the day, you have this beautiful formatted example of what the object does. So I want to do just a couple more examples of this, and then I'll let you make your choice about which direction you want to go. Oh, by the way, there is a shorter version of this. You can do -- format documentation, but you can also just do -fd. This is the same thing. That's what I would ordinarily do. Right. Oops. So here we go. Actually, let's do this. So let's document the second one, the case where it gets called with an integer and a value. Again, we're just grabbing these 3 cases here. So let's take. Can also. I'm going to fold this guy up here and fold this up here. So this is when called. And this is the kind of case where you can just say, well, can I copy some of this stuff? Like, yeah, we can just copy this length. In fact, this whole thing here. Let's see if we can copy everything. So I'm just going to copy everything here. And it's the same array, which tells us we should probably have a context that handles both. No, because it's a different. Okay, yeah. So we've got a length, but now we want to give it an argument. So let's just give it an argument, the string foo. And so we still expect the array to have length equal to that length. So let's run that test. That passes. And this one should fail, though. Right. So this is our. Since we're actually testing the standard library, we're not doing the red-green refactor because we're not refactoring the standard library. But here you can see that this is actually wrong. Instead of nil, we expect it to be foo. In fact, we can even do this here. We can do this. Let the value be foo and put it in here. I'm preemptively refactoring. Return an array with consisting of the given value. So let's run this again. Oh, now it's green, and the whole test suite is also green. And we can go down here and run our documentation. And now it's giving us more information about arrays. telling us what happens when array.new is called with an integer and a value. And finally, let's go just as the last workshop example. Let's go down to the systematic list of methods, and let's look at this public instance method ampersand. And in fact, I'm just going to copy this here. Oh, yeah, this will be fine. So I'm just going to copy this. Well, I'll copy it for reference. So take a look at this. So this is no longer array.new. So it's going to be outside of here. It's going to be, I'm going to describe. And now I'm basically just taking this right from the documentation. I'm going to say, I don't know what it does with that, that arrow. Let's just do this, though. I'm going to copy this and say, describe array ampersand other array. And so I'm just going to paste this in. Oops, where is it? Darn it. All right. This is not, I have a nice, there's this really useful little piece of software called Jump Cut that it stores a list of all of the things that have been in your copy, in your buffer. So when you copy things, it's got like the last 20 things or whatever. And so I'm trying to cycle through it, but because of the way the AV is set up, it doesn't actually work. In case you're wondering, like, what is he doing up there? Okay, so let's copy this. I just want to do one last example. So here are two arrays. Let's just put these in lets. So let array. I'm really just literally copying the documentation because we want array ampersand other array. So here's array. Here's let other array. And I don't like these spaces. I don't know why. And so now it should return the set intersection of the two arrays. So we expect array ampersand other array, oops, I hit escape there, to equal, let's just give it the empty array just to give it have a failing test. And so now what's the actual intersection of these two? Well, 1 is a common element, and 3 is also a common element. So this should pass. And there we go. So now our test suite is passing. And we can look at one last example of our documentation. There we go. So now we've got this last section here. Array ampersand other array should return the set intersection of the two arrays. Okay, so that takes us up almost exactly on time, amazingly, because we started a little late. So now we've got the last thing. We've had our wolf and our stag and our lion, and now it's time for the dragon, which is our workshop.